My name's Julian Nadell. I'm a senior software developer at GitHub and a sessional instructor at the University of Toronto. And I'm going to be your panel host for today. Welcome from across Canada and the United States for some of us. I'm going to start this off by asking each of our panelists to take 2 or 3 minutes to tell everyone a little bit about who they are, where they're from, did they go to school? If so, which school did they go to? And then what is their current role, and maybe any other relevant roles they think might be relevant, I guess, to the overall conversation. Monarch is in the direct middle of my screen right now, so let's start with Monarch.
Sure. Well, thank you to the Curious team for having me over here today. I'm one of the co-founders at MintBean, which is also a hackathon community and a community for junior developers. But a few years ahead, we mainly work with graduated developers who are looking for their first jobs. And I'm the principal developer over here, and also the person who sets up all the hackathons and generally runs the program from a high level and sets up the program from a high level. I graduated from finance, actually. My bachelor's was in finance, and that didn't work out too well because I graduated in about 2012, which was just a couple of years after the massive financial meltdown. And even then, even 4 years after, it just wasn't a great time for students to graduate from finance. So I ended up working in retail, actually. And I broke into software development by self-study and eventually put myself through a master's degree in software engineering. Didn't finish it because then I started a business, which eventually morphed into MintBean. So the previous iteration of the business was we were a software development firm. We built, in 4 years, we built projects for more than 40 clients. And it was a lot of fun, lots of Java, JavaScript, TypeScript. So I'm a full-out geek, but I can also address some of the business side stuff.
That's fantastic. It sounds like MintBean's really a community that the students should remember for a couple of years from now. Yeah, so go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, absolutely. And even now, we do get high school students, not too many, but we do get high school students, and they do hang out. Yeah, it's always great working with new software developers.
That's great. Maybe we can jump over to your colleague, Navi, and hear a little bit about her involvement in MintBean as well.
Yeah, definitely. I was hoping that you'd pass it on to someone else before you pass it on to me. But all right, here we go. So I am Monarch's colleague and wife. And we've sort of had a really interesting, I'm going to kind of, I guess, take you guys back into like how my professional journey sort of began. I am too a graduate of finance. That's actually where Monarch and I met. And it was weird. We were in a finance program right at the cusp of the financial meltdown. And that was like year one, I think, for us. And we knew that we weren't going to get a job in finance. But, I think when you're young, you're very optimistic and you're like, no, that's not going to be me. Maybe other people are just not trying hard enough. So when I finished high school, I wanted to do 2 things. And they're 2 very different things. I wanted to go into psychology, or I wanted to go into investment banking. They have nothing to do with each other. I don't know why those 2 tracks. I ended up picking finance. And for those 4 years, all I wanted to do was become an investment banker. So much so that, when none of the hedge funds in Toronto were hiring in 2011-12. And I was like, okay, well, let me try corporate finance. It's at least around the same vicinity, and like I'll still be in that sector. But I was in corporate finance as an analyst, and I tried lots of different roles: business analyst, project analyst, trades analyst, sales analyst, Yeah, there was like at least 3-4 different roles, and it just wasn't driving me. I just kept finding that it wasn't connecting with who I was as a person. I was just interacting with Excel all day. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just I'm a people person. And, that was actually the first line of code that I wrote in VBA, which was a lot of fun. So my Excel skills are pretty pro, but they're rusty now. So don't test me on it. And then I wasn't really happy at work. And then I would come home, and so Monarch and I kind of went our 2 different directions. I graduated and I was like, I'm going to go do corporate finance. He was like, okay. He tried, I think you were in retail and in retail mobile, and he was becoming a manager at Virgin Mobile, I think. And he was like, this is not really me. So I think he picked up a Java reference and started studying programming. And I've seen that entire journey of his. And I've seen how interesting software development was sort of from the sidelines as he was like learning his skill and just like going from various different startups. And I was like, ooh, I want to be a part of that. This sounds so interesting. People actually have a say at work, even if you're not a senior person. This sounds interesting. So I decided to quit my job, and I went to a boot camp, learned software development. And then after finishing the program, realized that this was 4 years ago now, that employers were still not really willing to take a risk on me because they were like, hey, you're really new. You don't have experience on your resume. We can't really hire you as a developer. So I ended up freelancing. And that freelancing actually opened up lots of different opportunities for me. And that's sort of how I became a technical project manager. And then one thing led to another. I ended up sort of managing the day-to-day operations of our service firm. And then from there, we got to hire lots of talented developers. And we sort of saw how the hiring cycle from both the candidate side and the employer side were both like broken. And that's really when the seed of Mint Bean truly began. And the conversations began probably like 4 or even 6 years ago. And then the pandemic hit and we were like, it's now or never. And that's when we started Mint Bean.
That's such a fascinating story. It's so interesting to hear you going from the finance side, deciding Excel isn't the life for you, and just kind of going through that path and eventually, ending up as the COO, I think, of Mint Bean.
That's right.
I think that's, such a valuable experience. And I always see some questions that I'm sure, you and Monarch can give kind of some maybe dissonant views compared to some of the other people in the panel. So thank you so much.
Definitely.
Stefan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
It might not be as interesting as Navi's story, but I can start, of course. So I'm Stefan Robitaille. I'm the director of the data and analytic at Metro. Metro is a grocery and pharmacy store chain in Eastern Canada. But I have something in common with Navi, which is at the age of 13, I began, having fun with computer sciences, but it was with Excel, VBA, and all that stuff. I used to screw my father's computer. He had to bring it back to the office saying, no, it's not my son. It's something happened. I don't know what. So that's how I started loving computer sciences. So I went to college and I got my degree in computer sciences in 1995. So yes, I was part of the 2000 bug that maybe your parents are talking to you. So I was in there. I had my college degree in 1995, and 6 years ago I got my MBA from the University of Sherbrooke. So I've been working almost all my life in the same company, which was bought by Metro afterwards. And this is a big corporate thing there. So tonight, what I'm here for is if you have any question around big corporation versus startups, I have the corporate story for you. So that's about it for my story.
I think that's incredible. I mean, for me, Metro is my actual like day-to-day grocery store. It's the closest one to me, and so it's
Thank
fascinating
you.
to hear the data. No worries. It's fascinating to hear the data science. Plays a big part in that as well. So
Mm.
I'm anxious or excited rather to hear a little bit about that. And we've got two panelists left. Landy, you're the first one on the little boxes. So
Yeah.
do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Landy Simpson. I'm a graduate from the University of Toronto, the St. George campus. So that's like literally in the downtown core. I graduated about in 2018, and I've been in industry for about 4 years now. My current position, I recently started a new job at rebel.com. It's like a DNS hosting company. So I've been there for about 2 weeks now, but my previous job was at Quantum Mob, which is a consultation company. That company was more of like a fresh startup, and Rebel is more of like, it's been around for quite some time. So the transition from like an early startup to something that's a little bit more established, there's a bit of a wow factor there. Other than that, my interest in computer science, since I'm the youngest panelist here, I don't know, but my early exposure was actually like MySpace and Neopets. Those were the spaces where you could like edit HTML and CSS, and I just found it really fascinating. And similar to Stefan, I used to like, tweak my little $100 grandpa ancient computer and fool around with that and break it all the time. And it was a lot of fun. And as I grew up in the industry, or as I grew up learning about the industry, eventually my school introduced a computer science program, which was like an introduction to Turing programming language and an introduction to Java. So going into university, I had a little bit of that as a background, but it was still more or less a challenge getting my head wrapped around a lot of the concepts. And then coming into industry, there was a bit of a transition there from academia to actual industry practices. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Landy. I find it super interesting how many of us were barred from touching our parents' computer growing up. I had the same thing when I was like 6 or 7. They had to put a lock on the back because they kept trying to open it and take it apart.
Yeah.
This is back in the 90s, and so it was already a multi-$1,000 computer, and my parents didn't have a ton of money, and so they're like, if you break this, we don't have a computer anymore. So it's fascinating to hear all the similar stories. I'm sure so many of our students have also been banned from taking apart parents' computers.
Yeah.
A little bit cheaper versions, I'm assuming, since they're probably much newer. But yeah, thank you so much. Geneviève?
I guess that's me. So Landy, I have you beat. I'm class of 2020. But I graduated with a degree in human-computer interaction, which is, I guess, for some of y'all, a field that kind of like more recently evolved and something that I didn't know about. I'm from North Carolina. Tech is not a big industry out there. So when I went to my university, Stanford University, it was like the first time I'd ever been exposed to a lot of technology. So it was a huge learning curve. Unlike everyone else, I was not as interested in the HTML or the CSS, but what really caught my attention was the design side of things. So I was really fascinated in how things are constructed, why they're constructed, and getting to what Navi said, a little bit of the psychology behind how we interact with the folks who use these products. Because in a lot of ways, there's this sociology theory that I like to think about called the third place. And 20 years ago, you know, your first place would be your home, your second place would be your work, and your third place would be maybe a cafe or a bar. And now our third places are our phones. And how is that shaping our behavior and the ways that we interact with the world? It was always questions that I was really interested in thinking a little bit more about. I'm still at my first job, which is I'm a user researcher at GitHub. It's something I absolutely love. It's fascinating. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more about maybe less traditional roles in like the tech industry, I'm definitely your girl. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. I realize I never really mentioned my background in schooling, and I suppose that's relevant if anyone wants to direct questions to me, though I do want to emphasize that the panelists should be the ones answering most of the questions here. You're welcome to direct some to me. I graduated from the University of Ottawa in 2015 with an undergraduate degree in computer science. I started off in physics though, because that's what I was good at in high school, and having gone to kind of a smaller rural high school, I didn't really have a ton of options, and so computer science wasn't something I knew about until first year university. And I realized I didn't like physics. And so what I learned from that, for example, is like what you like in high school might not be what you end up in, and that's okay. I did a number of internships, most of them were at Shopify. So I was there for a couple of years. I experienced their IPO, which is their initial public offering, where they start offering stock options to the public. And I left in 2019, I think, and joined GitHub. So I've been here for almost 2 years to the day. And about the same time, I actually started teaching at the University of Toronto. So that's my background. As you might notice, we have a variety of backgrounds here. That's not on accident. We made sure that we got a variety of experiences from computer science and tech to computer science that transitioned to business in both Monarch and Stefan, to pure business, to user research, and then software engineering with Landy. We wanted to make sure that, and when I say we, I mean Leo and myself, we wanted to make sure that we had a good mix. And so we talked a lot about different universities. And so the first question I would like to ask from our Google form that we sent out is, does the university you go to matter significantly? Like is there a specific university, and maybe this is different based off of whether you're going to business or tech, and maybe it's different between Canada and the US. That's something we can definitely discuss since we have both perspectives here. Would anyone like to start us off?
I guess I'll start.
Sure.
In high school, with your parents kind of in your ear, the university mattered in terms of like their standing. But once you got into the university and you started to experience what they had to offer, you eventually realize that every university has their own kind of like specialization. The University of Toronto was very focused on research. So the computer science program was reflected in that light. A lot of the things that were taught were to kind of mold you into a researcher role. So a lot of the practical skills taught in industry, or you learn in industry, it wasn't really taught at the University of Toronto in that way. Whereas I have friends who are going like the college route, or they're learning programming on their own, and it's a lot more hands-on practical skills that they can use. Not saying that the research route isn't the right route. It's great. It introduced me to so many great algorithms and ways of thinking about programming that I use in my day-to-day work. But at the same time, I lacked that hands-on experience that I wish I got at the University of Toronto. So it really depends on what your focus or your focal point is. If you really want to dive into like machine learning and artificial intelligence and really dive into a research-like role, then, you know, really do your research on which university could provide that for you, or which college or which route in your life will provide that for you. But if you want more hands-on skills, you know, consider a different route, and don't be, you know, don't be scared to, you know, stand up to your parents or stand up to anybody who's like, no, this has a better name. At the end of the day, the skills that you acquire is more important than the brand or the name of the school. So, you know, that's my little tidbit.
I can.
I was going to ask Stefan a question on a follow-up, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Stefan, I assume you're, you know, as a director, you've hired a lot of people. You know, building off of what Landy said, does the name, like, do you look at the name of the university when you're hiring?
Not really the name, except if it's something very, you know, special like Harvard or Oxford, stuff like that. We will look at it, and depending on the company, this may get people to run out of there, or they will be interested, because we know that someone for a big from a big university will cost a lot more than a regular one, you know. We also know around our, you know, I'm from the region of Montreal, so the universities in Quebec, we know the different way of teaching from the different universities. So let's say we want someone that's really hands-on, we will probably go somewhere like Sherbrooke. But if it's in research, like Landy say, or something like that, maybe more McGill or stuff like that. But what we are really looking for is, what is the program you enrolled in? What did you learn over there? Is it relevant to our needs, our current needs in the business? So that's the most important part for me, at least.
Yeah, thank you. That I think that kind of nailed it down pretty well. Monarch, you wanted to add something? Is that still something you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, and it's even better now that Stefan shared his viewpoint with us, and I completely agree with Landy and Stefan. I wanted to maybe add a nuance over here, which is, to me, universities are important in three ways. So there's, they're broken down into three phases for me. One is admissions, one is the program, and then one is post-grad, so alumni experience. On the admission side, the university you go to the type of students that they tend to intake will make a massive difference in your university experience. So on the admission side, you want to go to a university that has your kind of people who are interested in the same things that you're interested in. The grades matter a lot over here. The higher the grade you get, the better the university you can get into, and better in the sense that you'll have peers that are also similarly conscientious as you, or have similar interests as you. The second way that a university matters is the program itself. So like Landy said, if you go to a program that's more research-based and you're more interested in hands-on work, then that's not a good fit. So you have to watch out for the program that you're getting into. If you're more interested in building your coding skills, I would recommend that you not go to a research-based institution. If you're interested in something that's more deep computer science, maybe a more computer engineering thing is not really your jam. And then there's, after you graduate, the label that you graduate with matters. So like Stefan said, if you graduate from a top-tier university, that makes a difference. But if you graduate from a university that happens to have just a way better support system, a way better alumni program than you, than other universities, check out what kind of alumni have graduated from a university that you're considering, and go for the university that's graduated alumni that you admire and respect, if you have that option.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I know I wish I knew a little bit more about universities going into it. I probably would not have chosen the University of Ottawa if I had known, but I don't think it's in my case has ended up being super detrimental. Navi or Geneviève, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I think that where we are today in 2021, I think companies are sort of realizing that pedigree doesn't hold the same merit that it once did. And I think that because they want to diversify their talent pool, they're not looking, yes, Harvard, Oxford, and all your Ivy Leagues still have that very strong label, but it's not, companies don't just want to hire from University of Toronto. Like, let's talk Canadian universities, Waterloo. They want to kind of go to, if you want diversity in your team, you want to go and access talent in other talent pools, and companies are realizing that, which is a great thing. And I think that, like, when you're young, I went to York, and I remember, like, everybody knows, like, there's this common phrase that York, if you can pick up a fork, you can go to York. And like, I used to irritate me so much when people used to say that to me. When I was in high school, I was I didn't commit myself. Like, I was a B grade student. I would study like the night before the exam and get an 80 something, and that was like okay for me. So it's like, if I had committed myself a little bit more, maybe I would have gotten into a university that had that label. But like, reflecting on it now, it's like, it's really what you make out of the opportunity. So even if your grades are not like where you want them to be, that's okay. Think about the university that has accepted you, and what can you do with that program? What opportunities can you expose yourself to? Internships, groups inside of the university, right? So it's really how you use that opportunity. I think labels are like, we've kind of moved past that. We no longer are kind of like, oh, you went to Waterloo, or yeah, it still has, like, I'm not saying that it has no merit. It still has it, but I feel like companies are just more receptive to other talent pools. So that, which is a great thing.
Yeah, I think that definitely tracks with what I've seen as well. Genevieve, how does this compare to the States? Is this the same there?
Yeah, so I think that from my perspective, I guess what I would say is, I went to a place where the culture was completely different from the place where I was from. And I did that on purpose because I wanted a really different experience. And that's what I got. I think, to everybody's point, what I would say, though, is also, you are not locked in wherever you are. If you find that something's not a good fit for you, like, do what you need to do to change it, to make it better for yourself. Like, college shouldn't be about, or university shouldn't be about, suffering through it to get through it. I think that they're like doing whatever you can to make that better, finding your people wherever they are, or like switching universities if that's what's good for you. I think is something that's like really important to understand, that like, you're not locked into this path that's like inevitably going forward. I loved what Navi said about internships. I think it's key, because I think that ultimately, really beyond the name of the school, it's about who you know. I think fundamentally that's what's going to get you a job. And if you've done internships, and the folks folks in your program, and they go to get jobs, when you're looking to make a change, you want to be able to lean on those folks to be able to give you, support and an opportunity, because I think that's really what makes opportunities. It's not, the name of your school, it's who you know. And there's certainly like a correlation between like where folks tend to go, especially in different universities, and like where they end up. But I do think that like, fundamentally, it's about making like, college in large part is about making connections with folks that you can leverage later in your career, which is why I loved what Monarch said about kind of that postgraduate alumni experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is super spot on as well. A lot of what I'm gaining is often through connections. I mean, at this point, four of our five panelists are from a previous event I held earlier in the year. And, we have now a new connection, right? We have, Stefan joining that mix. And I realized this a couple years ago as well. There was an event, and I saw some of the older generation of software engineers, and they knew each other for the past 20, 30 years. And it turns out that there is kind of like this almost shadow network of connections. And so building those people connections is super crucial. I see some nods. Is there anything anyone wanted to add to that? Or we can jump on to the next one. The next one is also about university. It's kind of a general question, but I'm not sure if we're the best people to answer it, but like, what do these students have to do to get into university? Does anyone have anything they wanted to start off there?
I can maybe venture, well, offer insights from my perspective. Universities want, obviously grades are important, goes without saying. If you really want to expand on, if you really want to open a lot of doors for yourself, you also have to show a bit of personality, a bit of initiative, and explain to them in your application process. There's always an essay that you need to send in. There's always, you always need to send in your basically your bio when you apply to a university, and that's a great time to tell them about things that you've been doing in your spare time. If you've been, for example, coding, then send them a link to your GitHub. Send them a link to your portfolio or whatever game you've built. Send them links. Send them screenshots or explanations of what it is that you've done outside of just academics. That's maybe related to the field, or that shows that you have a strong moral character. If you've been volunteering at charities, that makes a big difference. If you have been raising money for charities, that makes a big difference as well. Universities want to hire people who are good people, who have interesting profiles already right out of high school. And anything you can show that shows you off as a more interesting person in general, especially relating to the field that you're applying for, will open doors for you, even if you don't have the grades.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch a little bit on the grades part, I know this past year has been very difficult for students to get in. We're talking 98 and 99+% averages of the freshmen entering into the University of Toronto, at least. And I know that's weighing on a lot of high school students. You know, just as you've heard from a lot of our panelists, you know, you don't have to go to the University of Toronto or Waterloo or UBC. I know those are kind of the big ones, with like McGill and Queens being kind of the next round I often hear people speak about. You can go to other places, and then, you know, you might have a little bit more legwork to get the same opportunities. I know like Waterloo has a fantastic co-op program, but I still had a fantastic co-op experience at the University of Ottawa, for example. And so, you know, don't limit yourself just because of that, and you know, don't just go for all the top tier schools. Make sure you have some that are, you know, they say this in the media a lot. You're like your safety net school. I think that might be more of an American term, though. Does anyone else wanted to say something?
Yes,
Yeah.
I may add something on this. Sorry, Julian. You know, we are in such a need of, let's say, developers everywhere. In these times, you can go to any university. The majority of the businesses in which you could apply, just like myself, when I look at the academic on your resume, it's just to get an idea of how old you are, you know. So it doesn't really matter where you went. I just want to make sure you studied in the right subject that I'm interested in. But the demand is so high, you shouldn't be worried about where you go to the, you know, at which university. That's my point of view.
Yeah, I just kind of want to reiterate the same thing that Stefan and Monarch are saying as well, and of course Julian, you as well, is don't get stuck on the brand. I think that we often do that, is that, you know, even with like when you're applying for a job and like you're going after that brand, and once they reject you, it kind of it sits really heavy with you. So I think that have, do your research, of course, and have a number, like maybe, 5 or 10 universities that like you really want to go to. And then it's not just, yes, the grades do represent a large chunk of, the admissions process, but that essay that Monarch talked about is a really key differentiator, right? Like, what are you doing outside of academics and grades? Like, what committees are you part of? Like, what have you done in your high school that maybe differentiates you from your peers? Are you in clubs? Have you led any initiatives? Are you part of any charities? Have you, like, what other things are you doing? And that's really what admissions looks at. And I don't think we're the right people to give you advice, because none of us are part of the admissions team, but I think this is kind of like general information that we just know, maybe because going through that university experience, you're like, I wish I knew this when I was like 16. So there's that.
Thank you so much, Navi. Geneviève, is there anything you wanted to add, or do you want to move on to the next question?
I could just say briefly that also I think like you being a teenager is like important and key to your mental health, and like just also finding things that like to do that energize you. It's like not just about your resume, if when you're 16, 17, 18, like also things that are just like making sure that you have time for yourself. It's hard when you're living at home and you're with your parents are telling you what to do all the time. Like, it's important to just like take a breath, I think, too, in addition to all the stuff that we talked about before.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic call out. The mental health aspect, especially over this last year. Tech is a very easy industry to burn out in. So I think that leads into our next question. Why tech?
I would love to take this one and just lead on this one, because I also want to segue from the last one, which is, I guess this is a good time to just share an experience that I had in the last year and a half. After, this pandemic has been weird for mental health, and we lost a lot of contracts just when the pandemic started, and we started doing these hackathons. We've done 86 of them in the last year and a half, and what we found, which was really interesting, is that a lot of people that were coming into tech didn't come from a computer science background, and that was a really interesting find for me. Just because maybe you don't get into university, let's take the worst case scenario, doesn't mean that you have to worry in this industry, as long as you have the skills and the grit to get in. Why tech? Because it's democratic. It accepts people from all walks of life, from all skill sets. If you're an artist, you can come into tech as a UX UI designer or an illustrator. If you're more of a business side person, you can come in as a project or a product manager. If you're a geek like me, you can break in as a software developer, a QA engineer. If you're coming in from et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much scope for people in this industry. It's growing leaps and bounds every single year. I don't know if it's quite exponential anymore, but it's growing by leaps and bounds every year. Most of the people who come into MintBean are actually bootcamp grads, which is also interesting. So even if you don't graduate from university, you can get into tech as somebody who did a 12-week course, and you can get into tech as a software engineer, which is amazing. And it's a legitimate route in. Lots of people get in that way. So why tech? Because it's probably the most forgiving industry to get into. I think if you went and tried to get into, for example, law or medicine, and you didn't pass university, I don't think there would be much scope for you to get into those fields. You'd probably have to do a pivot. In tech, I've personally hired one person who dropped out of Waterloo, and another person who out of another university. My two best hires were university dropouts, and one of them has gone on to earn more than $100,000, even though he dropped out from university. So I think the biggest takeaway for me on why tech is because it's democratic and it's meritocratic. It cares more about your skill set and not about your pedigree or where you come from, and that's why I love it so much.
Sorry, I just want to add on to that. Another thing with tech is just flexibility. You meet people from all across the globe, which means you yourself have the ability to go all across the globe to work wherever you want, however you want. You're not locked into a particular country, you're not locked into a particular system, which makes it hard to jump into another country and find your way through that system, right? There's no standardized test or anything. It's really all about the skills that you have and how it's relevant to the job that you're going towards. And then, also the cultural barriers, but that goes without saying, right? So for me, why tech is because I know I don't want to stay in Canada for the rest of my life. Maybe I want to go to Japan. Maybe I want to go to UK. Maybe I want to go to America. But I know that tech gives me that flexibility. And even in the role that I'm currently in, I'm so flexible being at home. I have the remote option in which I could take care of my health. I could take care of my parents. I could start to prioritize other aspects of my life that affect my mental health, rather than, sitting at a desk from 9 to 5, completely zoomed in. Tech gave me that flexibility, in which when I went into tech, I didn't know about that flexibility. But as I grew into the industry, I realized, wow, I have so many more options than I actually thought I did. And I think after this pandemic, people are looking for that flexibility. They want to maintain that. So if that's something really important to you, tech may be the place for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. There's definitely been a big change in the industry in the last year and a half. A lot more mental health days, a lot more 4-day weeks I'm seeing pop up. Even for Canada, I'm seeing our salaries start to even out with the States just a little bit, but that'll help kind of equalize the industry there. Stefan, as somebody from like big corporation tech, what would your answer be to this?
I think Monarch just made me realize that it's true. I hire people that have degrees in physics, nothing to do with tech, but they had the chance to get a course in some kind of technology. They loved it. They have their degrees in physics or anything else, and they started working in that tech. And it's been 5 years now. That's exactly what we're looking for. We want you in. It was a very good point, Monarch, you just brought here.
Yeah, thank you so much for, I guess, the validation of that point. Geneviève, you're the newest to tech industry. What would your perspective be on this question?
I think I actually had a lot of apprehension about joining technology, because I think that fundamentally technology has operated with people who have been truly fundamentally optimistic about tech being a force for good. And I think we've recently seen that technology and the development of technology, and especially the way that we use advertising surveillance as a way to target consumers. That's a huge revenue driver for a lot of these tech companies. It makes it an ethically complicated decision to decide to move into this industry. And that's why, technology is this huge force in the financial sector now. It is hugely growing in a way that we haven't seen technology taking over Fortune 500 companies before. It's a main driver of culture. It's a main driver of conversations around equity, I think. But one of the things that I was really concerned about is what kinds of people work in technology. And I think that also people like me who are dubious, who are anxious, who are nervous, who want to be in that room and ask folks do we know what the ramifications of these decisions are? How can we make sure that this is actually a force for good? What are the risk factors here? I think is another reason to enter into tech, because I do think that why not tech is a relevant question too. What should you be concerned about and aware of? What kind of contract you're signing when you join a technology company is also that you might be in a part of a company that you kind of disagree with. And I think that conflict between what you believe are your personal values and the values of a company is also a healthy struggle to have, is how do you define yourself versus how do you define this company that you're working for, which I think is an equally important and relevant point to talk about. in addition to all of the wonderful things that technology brings us.
I just thought of something else. If you're a creative person, tech is your place, because even though you're working with one piece of technology, every day is something different that comes to you. Sometimes I think about people working in warehouses and all that stuff. They're doing the same thing 9 to 5. My God, I couldn't do that. But you know, technology, it's a new challenge every day. This is something very interesting too.
Yeah, I think things are fantastic points. Monarch, sorry.
Yeah, and I think to Stefan's point and also to Genevieve's point, for Stefan, absolutely. I think you implied over there, which I agree with, that creativity is more than just being able to paint a pretty picture. It's really about problem solving, and that's the heart of creativity. And if you're a creative person, whether you look at yourself as creative or not, if you like solving problems or you like creating things, then tech is the absolute right place for you to be, because every day you'll be making something new, you'll be solving a new problem. And for Genevieve, I completely agree with you. It's a force. I don't know if it's a force for good or not. And by being in tech, I think we all have an opportunity to have an exponential impact on the world, because if I write a line of code and 10,000 people use it, and that's a very small number for a lot of the work that we do, and I've made 10,000 people's lives either better or worse. And so by writing code, you can have a massive outsized impact on the world, which is maybe another reason why people who want to do good in the world might want to be in tech.
Yeah, I mean, these are all fantastic points. I love tech myself just because of the creative aspect, but I'm also I'm not as optimistic as I was, I think, earlier in my career. Some of the experiences I've had, there've been plenty of examples in the media. You know, Shopify with selling guns, or providing stores for, you know, Donald Trump, or, you know, Proud Boys and other terrorist organizations, or, you know, GitHub with their whole ICE fiasco. No matter what, you're going to have those political ramifications put on you, because you are working in such a force that it's kind of inevitable that no matter what you're doing, there's going to be some sort of ethical dilemma. And so when you're doing your university courses, I do highly recommend you take an ethics course. I think that's becoming mandatory for most comp sci degrees for accreditation, but make sure you do take that. And on that note,
I want to add one last thing for why tech. I feel like this is, everyone's brought up such good points. You know, whether even if you take a ethical, it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you stand on. The truth is, the way that I look at tech is we live our life, I think maybe even more than half of our life, 80% of our life is lived online. And then the rest of it is offline. So, you know, when you spend that much, as a society, as a civilization, if we're living online and you're affected by the choices that these technology companies make, you want to be a part of that equation, whether you whether you agree with them or disagree with them. You need to understand how that ecosystem works, so that you can be a part of the conversation and make the change that you want to make. So I just kind of wanted to add that last thing, because I agree with everything that everyone said.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a fantastic point. Be the change that you want to make, and in this case, tech would then be just a tool for making that change. So maybe the question is, why do you need to use tech? On that front, though, we have some questions about startups and corporations. We have kind of people from both sides. We have people kind of sitting in the middle. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are the pros and cons of smaller startup, such as MintBean, versus larger corporations such as Metro? I'm not sure how big Rebel is. Otherwise, included in that spectrum somewhere, but I'm sure you can fill us in. Anyone want to start us off?
I'd love to hear Stefan or Landy.
I've mostly worked at startups since the time I graduated. I really like startup culture. I never felt the force to go to like a big corporation, or not yet. But the thing that I really love about startup culture is just how fast paced startup culture is. Something's always changing on the dot. And for that might not be for everybody, but for me, I don't like sitting still. I like having something to do like all the time. And my first space that I worked in, sometimes, you know, we would pick up a programming language to do a particular task, and then, you know, a month later, we got to refactor it. We got to do something else with it. And it can be frustrating at times, like that's a con in itself, but there's also a pro to it as well, right? It's what you take out of that experience. And I think for all my startup experiences, the things that most people, you know, say, you know, that's not so great, that's mostly a con in, you know, startup culture, I took it away as a pro because it helped me grow my skill set at an accelerated rate. Especially being at a consultation company, Quantum Mob, I was working with so many different projects, and I had to switch, context switch constantly, probably every 4 to 6 months. So maybe one project I'm working in PHP, another project I'm working in Java, another project I'm working in JavaScript. And each place or each project that I switched off of, I had something to say. I had an experience to take away from. And it helped me gauge where I want to go next in my career. Like, do I want to end up in a PHP project? Do I want to end up in a Java project? Like, where do I see myself out of all these spaces? So startup helped me kind of quickly figure out, what do I want to do in this space? But in the future, I kind of see myself, you know, settling down into a more corporate space, but I want to make sure that corporate space is something for me, like something that reflects who I am and what I'm interested in. So I think startup culture is great if you're just getting out of school, or like if you just want to kind of experiment with, you know, a little bit of here, a little bit of there, without the pressures of corporate culture. But, you know, it all depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you so much, Landy. I was just thinking while you were talking, like maybe this question would be nice to kind of form of like startups upwards to the larger corporations, so we can get the perspective one after the other. So that would put, you know, Monarch or Navi kind of next, and then maybe Geneviève kind of as a medium enterprise, followed by our grand finale of the big corporation. Though, to, you know, just say GitHub is owned by Microsoft, but we are operated separately as a smaller mid-sized enterprise. So not to be confused with the 200,000 person Microsoft. Monarch, Navi?
Yeah, I'll take the lead. Landy, great points. I think when you're assessing, I've worked in both. When I graduated from finance, I was in corporate for 6 years, and then my career in tech has been primarily in the startup space. So I can, I guess, talk for in both perspectives. But even when you think of startups, the startups actually vary depending on what stage the startup is in. So, and I think, Landy, you mentioned that with that first job that you were in. And then, so, you know, Shopify called itself a startup for a very long time. Even though I had grown significantly, and I feel like companies still use the title of startup sometimes because they want to look cool and they want to look relevant to, you know, especially the intern audience. And it's like, oh, we're still a startup, but it's like, wait, you have a shit ton of revenue. Sorry for my French. But like, you know, it's like, you're making a lot of money. Are you sure you're still a startup? So I don't know what the true definition of a startup is, but I think that there's also this personality fit you have to think about when you're thinking about going into a startup, especially a startup that's very early stages. A lot of the work that you do in those organizations is completely unstructured. So there is no, like, yeah, they'll have a job description that they put up because they want to, be honest in terms of like, this is what you're primarily going to be doing, but you wear so many different hats. You're doing so much, especially like, when we're talking about the development experience, you are touching, like, can you imagine being in an enterprise and doing Java and JavaScript? Like, that's crazy. Like, and we've done that with our own developers, and the learnings that they capture out of that. And it's not just the developers, it's everyone. You just wear tons of different hats, and it's like, and it sounds like a lot of fun, but you have to think about, do you, as someone, as an individual, do you need structure, or are you someone who works great outside of structure? So that's kind of what I wanted to add for the startup piece. And I'm going to let Stefan speak on the corporate side, because I'm sure he'll do a much better job.
Not sure, but I like Julian's idea of going up and finishing with me, because just so you know, I don't know how it works in a startup, so I'm eager to hear everything I hear this tonight, and I can give you my point of view at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that was that's great to hear, and thank you, Navi. Having been in the audience when the chief HR officer at Shopify said that they were still a startup, there was a lot of rolling of the eyes from the audience. Just to put it out there. Yeah, quick aside for the question in the side. A startup is typically a small company, few employees, recently founded. They're definitely not IPO, so there's no public stock offering. They aren't acquired. Typically, I'd say a company would probably stay a startup until they have maybe 200, 300 employees. At that point, it starts to get fuzzy. But they've got maybe some cash flow, but they're definitely not rolling in money yet. So unless, of course, they've gotten massive funding from Silicon Valley, in which case they might be rolling in money. Monarch, did you have anything to add from the startup side?
Yeah, just briefly, because Navi did a good job. Just we kind of are on the same page on this. Every job is unique, and every company is unique regardless of size. Sometimes you end up working in a small team in a large company, and that ends up being more startup-y than many startups. There are some correlations. I would say that if you're looking to understand how large business systems work, how purchasing, how organization, and just hiring, if you want to learn how to build big companies, or if you know that you're more interested in working in companies that change the world with every decision they make, then you probably want to go into enterprise. If you want to if you want to learn how to build something from scratch, build a company from scratch, build processes entirely from scratch, test a hypothesis, go out in the market and play with the market, metaphorically speaking, then startup is probably more your game. So it depends on what you want to learn and what your personality is. But yeah, every job is unique, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a good call out. I've heard even from my colleagues that came from the Microsoft side, they're like, we felt like a startup because we were a new office and we were like a branch of this, and we kind of operated independently. And speaking of Microsoft, Genevieve, you actually started at Microsoft, right? Like, that was your internship.
Yeah, I did. That felt very startup-y. There was lots of pivots. We really didn't have a clear vision, I think, on that team of what we were doing. So I think there was a lot of trying to figure out how we were going to take our idea into execution. But I think from that experience, what I learned is, folks will give you a lot of ownership if you act like you have a lot of competency. And that can be a good thing, and that can be a bad thing if you don't know what you're doing. So I think that there's like learning experiences you can get on both sides of that. I think speaking to the GitHub experience definitely feels different working for GitHub than it was working for Microsoft. I really appreciate about GitHub that there's so much ownership. Like in terms of like in Microsoft, where there would be like 20 product managers in one area, there's one product manager at GitHub. So I think that that's like one thing where it's really, you know, you get a lot more hand in the pot than you would otherwise, and ownership I think is a little bit more clear. You can see kind of how your impact, I think, in the company and in the decisions that are getting made. To be fair though, also I think GitHub has like speaking of outsized impacts, definitely has an outsized impact given the kind of community and platform that it has, which I think is kind of unique to the developer community, people being super jazzed to chat with you. But I think that honestly, on a more pragmatic note, working for an enterprise is more secure. And if that's something that you need financially, like it probably makes sense to go work for a larger corporation that is going to be like there for a while, that can give you some like concrete tools to work on as well. So I do think that's like another super legitimate reason to go like the larger company route, is if you're like, I want to cut my teeth and I really need to be able to like leverage some of these really important benefits, whereas some of these smaller companies, you know, don't have that. And that is definitely a factor when you're making a decision about where you want to work. That is super legitimate, even if it's not a culture fit, even if it's not a personality fit. Sometimes you're like, you know what, I really need that money. And that's really what is most important to me right now. So I think about leveraging like people, pay, place, and product when I think about the different job that I'm working, or leveraging which one of those I want to kind of pursue when I pick a job. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great call out. What I've heard in the past is, you know, startups are kind of like, you know, they're high risk but high reward. So in a startup, you'll typically get equity in the company, and that means they'll give you kind of stock options. And if that company IPOs, and that's a very big if, most startups do not IPO or get acquired. But if they do get acquired or IPO, those stock options become worth, you know, are worth a lot of money. You know, we're talking millions of dollars potentially, or maybe a few $100,000. It depends. But then you'll typically have a smaller salary to start off with, and whereas a big company and startups could just dissolve and they could just go bankrupt. Whereas bigger companies, you know, Microsoft's not about to lose $2 trillion. You know, they're not about to go under anytime soon. And while you'll still make good money, you're not going to make quite the same equity that you would at a startup. And so you'll be very comfortable, but you're not going to get, you know, $5 million. I had coffee with a friend this morning who was very lucky through the Shopify IPO, and he drove me home in his Porsche. So just as an example of kind of the high risk, high rewards, whereas I've seen many startups just go under and people go into debt. So it's, you know, keep that in mind when you're kind of comparing those. Which leads us into, sorry, Landy.
Sorry, one more point to that. One of the previous workplaces that I worked at, Ideal AI for Recruiting, they got bought out by Ceridian. So it was a big acquisition, and I had some old coworkers, and they profited big. So it really also depends on the type of startup and what they're thriving towards. For Ideal, they were all about AI for recruitment, and that's the space that they kind of occupied, machine learning. And a company was interested in them, and that's how it happened. So being aware of like the kind of startup that you are joining, what their goals are, what what the vision is, and how they're carrying out that vision will help you see where that startup is kind of going in the long run. If you see kind of the startups like a little wonky on their vision, they don't really know what they want to accomplish, maybe kind of steer away from that. But if it's a startup with a clear vision and path, then you could kind of rely on it and stick around and see how that plays out for you.
Sorry,
Yeah, totally.
Julia, I just wanted to add this question of equity. It can be really tricky, so make sure you do your research. There is a lot of shady practices out there, so just be careful. You know, when because that's what the big risk and reward is, right? That you get to work for a company for not as much salary, but then like, you know, you'll get a lot of money and hopefully be able to afford that Porsche. But sometimes companies that don't necessarily have the proper structure in place might try to get you to work for free on equity. So be careful with those equity practices and do your research.
Totally, yeah. My big advice would be, if you're getting to the point where somebody's offering you an equity package, go find a friend. You know, I'm sure you can reach out to most of us, if not any of us, and we'd be happy to talk. Or, you know, find somebody you trust at the university. Yes. So if you see an unpaid internship in tech, it's not reputable. Just as a TLDR. Yeah. Don't do unpaid internships. Tech internships are paid very well. So that leads us though into our corporation. So Stefan, what have you thought of everybody's thoughts so far, and how does that differ from corporations?
I think there's a bunch of differences, but one of them being what Landy said earlier, the pace. I think it's really different. Uh, I think it's true. You go into a startup and the pace must be crazy. And once you're ready to settle down, let's say have a family, you go into a corporation where they have, HR are taking care of everyone. There are different programs there, and from what I hear, I'm thinking about. For me, it sounds like startup are like you're going backpacking around the world, whereas the corporation you're traveling the world, but only one country at a time. I had the chance to start where I start to work. We were 60 people, and we're at this time we're now up to 500. So I can also say that probably in startups you're a big family, where in corporation you have several families under the same roof. This is another way to see it, maybe. Uh, but one thing I like a lot about BI and what I'm working in is that in the corporation you also have the ability to do something, and I don't know if it's an English word. I think so because it sounds right, but entrepreneurship. So you're not building your own company, you're building your company within the company you're working in. And this has great advantages. The risk is low, but usually corporate people like this from people they work in their company, because just like myself, I see my BI team as a product team which work for a client who happens to be the Metro folks. So it's possible to do kind of a startup stuff at certain extent. I for sure the pace is not the same, but you probably have a lot of capital you can use from the company with no risk. So this is something you might be interested in when you go and see a corporation that you think you want to work for. Ask if they're open to this kind of entrepreneurship. It's a good idea and something great.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. It's I've not worked in a larger corporation, and it's I've not actually heard of the intrapreneurship. I mean, I've heard the term before, but it's fascinating to hear that that kind of is what forms in a larger company. Just for the recording, I put it in the chat, but I don't think that'll stay. BI means business intelligence. I assume high school students might not know what that means. And it's just data science in terms of like business processes. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we do have time for a few questions from the audience live. Is there anybody that wants to either in chat or open up the microphone and or video and talk? Just I think there's the raise hand button at the bottom. You can hit H for that as well. Don't be shy. I know Leo at least has a question. He was saying he did, so maybe Leo can break the ice for us. What would you change about your career if you had to go over it again? So we're getting real deep. Start working at 12.
Pretty much. I think the earlier you get into the workplace, the better, personally. That's the only thing I would change. I started at, I think, 21 or 22. That was when I got my first job.
I started off as most Canadian teenagers at Tim Hortons. I hated everything about Tim Hortons for the next 5 years.
Navi did the same thing.
I also worked at Tim Hortons.
Oh my god, it was terrible. It was terrible. It was the worst experience ever.
You smell like donuts every day.
I can't have I don't enjoy Tim Hortons because of it.
I still really like their donuts. Sorry, I really enjoy the donuts. I never stopped liking them.
Yeah.
Sorry for the question. What would I change? I don't think there's like a particular path I would change, but I think my mindset I would have changed a little bit. I was so pessimistic about my career path. I was like, I'm not doing great in school. I'm never gonna make it in the industry. Who's gonna hire me? I was so frantic and so anxious because I'm also a naturally very anxious person about where my life would take me in tech. And the truth is, as long as you have the grit and you're curious, you could go anywhere in tech. You have the ability to learn something and hold on to that and use it. You could go anywhere in tech. There's no reason to be afraid that you won't land a job, or stay curious. You won't land a job, or you won't be able to get, that pay raise or that salary that you want. You can get there. It might take you some time, but it's limitless. Tech is limitless. You're boundless. So don't be worried if you don't get into the university that you want, or if you don't, get that first job at, GitHub or Google. Don't worry. You have your whole life to make it there, and maybe make it even bigger. So yeah, I would have changed my mindset.
I want to add to that. I love that, by the way, Landy. Coming from an East Asian descent, I was told that you have 5 options. Either you're a lawyer or you're a doctor, and that was or you're a some form of a doctor, some form of law, some form of business. And I didn't, so if I would go back, I would change my mindset on just the number of opportunities that there are, and that just because the door has closed on one, that doesn't mean that there's not multiple other doors that are open. And that being in tech, you could be part of user experience, you could be part of UX UI, you could do front end, you could do back end, you could do data, you can do product, you can do project. There's just, you can be a sale, even the sales role inside of SaaS companies. That's a whole different massive sector. So there's just so much opportunities in tech, and I think that's what I would go back and change. It's just you have options.
I hate to interject, but I just want to say I completely agree. I grew up in a military family, and so everyone I knew, from grandparents to parents, that they all had 30, 40, 50-year careers in the same place, and that doesn't always exist anymore. The average tenure at a company now is 2 years, and I would just go back and try to convince my angsty teenage self that there isn't one path, and then otherwise you're just never going to make it. Just keeping, as you said, more optimistic. Geneviève, Stéphane, maybe anything you want to?
Ladies first.
Thank you. I think that clearly I'm very early in my career, but I interned as a product manager, and my job was like liquidated. Microsoft told me, they were like, update, you're not welcome back here because like this whole part of the company is gone. You need to re-recruit. And this was right before the pandemic. So I had to go back to my manager and be like, hey girl, what's up? I hear that you're opening a user research team. I never saw myself as a user researcher, but I would love to try out user research. And I think that, like, initially I was really resistant to that idea because I was like, no, product management is way cooler. It's way harder to break into. And the only way to be a product manager is to have been a product manager before. And I wish initially I had just been like, this is the way things are going. And ultimately I was one of like 2 people that I knew that graduated with a job. And like all of my friends, like at Stanford University, which is supposed to be one of the most like elite universities for computer science and tech, nobody had a job. Folks got furloughed, laid off, offers, pushed out for a year. And I think that that's when you realize, got to stay flexible. So I think it's one of those things where being really open to different paths. And I'm super glad that ultimately I jumped onto a totally different career path that I think is a much better fit for me, honestly, than product management was definitely the right way to go. So I think staying flexible, staying open, and being grateful for what this industry, which really pulls through for you once you're a part of the community.
Thanks so much. Stéphane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm a big believer of whatever I did in the past brought me here tonight with you, and it's super great. So let's go ahead with other questions.
That's definitely the optimistic approach Landy and I apparently need to remember. Okay, so Leo asks, how much do side projects matter versus like data structures and leak code? He hears a lot of university students grinding on leak code. Does everyone know what leak code is?
I have very strong opinions.
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick overview. Leak code is kind of the term coin for the how do I say this without being biased? The term for what Google does in their interviews, where they ask you to like reverse a linked list while jumping 300 jumping jacks and while calculating simultaneously the amount of ping pong balls it takes to fill a Boeing 777. So leak code is just like the that was totally unbiased, totally biased, but
I think you and I are on the same page.
I'm pretty biased, but like I try not to like outwardly say it, but I'm not a fan of leak code because no matter how many leak code questions I do during the interview, I crack like an egg because I just crack under pressure. Leak code is great, you could review it a couple of times, but don't depend on leak code to get you the job. There are so many other factors in your resume and who you are as a person that contribute to you getting that job other than leak code. So, having side projects is a wonderful thing to do, and also just being part of the community in general. Maybe you don't have side projects, but maybe you like to write about tech, things that you're learning in tech. That could be, a big part of your resume, or, conferences that you attended, hackathons that you attended. How are you engaging in the community to show that you're building your skill set, you have an interest in it, and that you are a good culture fit to that company. But leak code isn't the end all be all for getting a job. So I wouldn't waste like zillions and zillions of hours on leak code, but there are some companies that do prioritize, making you do jumping jacks and juggling while solving an algorithmic question. So
I'm sure we could go over this question a ton. I mean, if case in point, Stéphane didn't even know what leak code was, and he's hiring tons of people. So clearly you don't need it. and at a certain point you'll have enough expertise you can just tell them no, and they have to listen. When you work at startups, I'm going to go over the next question just so we have about 5 minutes left. So let's maybe go into a lightning round. When you work at startups, do you feel like you overwork? Do you have time for other hobbies? Maybe Landy, Monarch, Navi.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Burnout is real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You have to learn to prioritize. Working in a startup, you have to learn to prioritize and understand your workload, and as the priorities change, your work, like, you can keep saying yes to the number of things that come your way. So it's a matter of changing priorities. Okay, well, yesterday I was doing this. Let's say if someone had given me 5 different projects and now I have a 6th project. It's like, do I drop one in order to make sure that I'm still able to do that commitment? In terms of, do I have time for other hobbies? Not always. And then that's the truth.
I have to disagree with that. I actually had time for hobbies. I used to play basketball, volleyball. I had time to write. I had time to do conferences. And I'm not the type of person that I don't like to overwork myself at all, because I have a weak immune system. So I have to keep it very strict. But it really does depend on the company that you're working for. The company that I used to work for and I currently work for, they really do prioritize your mental health. So they make sure that, your workload is reasonable, and also it's up to you to advocate for yourself. If you know you can't handle a certain project, or maybe you need additional help, make sure that you let your higher ups know. But I had all the time in the world to leave after work at 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. and do some other activity with friends and family. So I think it does depend on the startup.
I'll share some insights. So at MintBean, we have a pretty strict policy of 40 hours. That's it. You're not going to work. And we're a startup. We're probably as scrappy, as smallest startup you'll find, even though we've done a lot of good work in the junior developer sector. We are self-funded. We're bootstrapped. And even then, even though we're running on our own cash, we don't have investors. We still tell people, all right, you worked enough. Go away. We don't need you here right now. Now, having said that, there are crazy people like me who, even in mid-sized and enterprise firms, will work 80-hour weeks, and I'm proudly one of those people. Regardless of what job you're in, if you're like me and you don't mind overworking, don't be shy of that and lean into it. It's not for everyone. 80% of people won't have that, and no shame in that. But if you want to work more, don't let anybody tell you there's anything wrong with that. Lean into it, because the more hours you have, but in chair time, coding, doing UX, UI, whatever it is, the faster your career will grow. And I wanted to just put that perspective out there as well, without shaming people who want to have a strict work-life balance. I think these days hard work is somehow not talked about, and I don't like some of the. We don't always speak about hard work in a positive light, and we emphasize a lot about work-life balance. And I want people to know there's nothing wrong with actually working hard for 5 or 10 years to set up your career either. Depends on your personality, depends on your preferences and your situation. So, just wanted to put that out there as well, just to add.
Yeah, I really love the different opinions. I would have to say, I having started at Shopify as kind of a startup point, I definitely saw a lot of people doing the hard work, the overwork, and I think the best measure is yourself, and your breaking point and your mental health, and as long as you stay within that, then you're perfectly fine. I remember I had this one intern that I confiscated their work laptop on 2 different occasions, and forced them to go home. One was when they stayed up gaming too late and then had 5 espresso shots in the morning, and they couldn't function, and so I forced them to go home. And the other was when they were working at 9 p.m. at night and could barely stay awake because they stayed up late the night before. That is not within your bounds of your own mental health. So, and I think on a note of mental health, given that burnout is such a big topic in the tech industry, we are actually at time. Is there any closing thoughts any of our panelists would like to add?
Oh man, that was a heavy question as the last question. Like, you know, I completely agree with you, Julian. I think that every single person has, like your priorities in life change as well as you kind of grow and mature. When you're a younger person, you may have more time, but then as your life sort of changes, you know, either you, or like maybe you just like are dating someone, or you get married, you have children, or you want to travel, so your priorities change, and that means that maybe you're just not able to spend as much time towards working 80-hour weeks, and that's fine. So I think, like, you know, we're no longer in that era where you're working, I'm sorry, Stefan, but we're no longer in the era where you're with one company for like 25 years. So it's like, it's okay that, like, you know, one day I'm working as a user research, and then like a few years later, I'm like, okay, well, now I want to do project management, or I want to do something else. So it's like, have fun with it as well. Is my last parting words, is make sure you enjoy whatever you're doing.
Well, thank you so much, Navi, for those final words. Leo, is there anything you wanted to say before we wrap this up?
Not too much, but since this is the last marathon workshop, and our closing ceremony is coming up in around like 30 minutes, just for the participants, join us for that as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Leo, for reaching out to most of us, and for all of our panelists for coming to join us today. Thank you so much to all the students that joined, those that came in and left, and to anyone watching this recording afterwards. Thanks, and yeah, we can stop the recording now at any time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thanks, everyone. This is wonderful.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.